Welcome to another Library in Your Lounge Room live stream event, brought to you by Goldfields Libraries. Now, I would like to acknowledge that Goldfields Libraries is on Kulin Nation's land and pay all the necessary respects. I also want to remind you that you should check out the library's event page on our website to check out more upcoming events, or look around the channel, the one you're currently on, to look into ones that are either coming up or ones that we've shown recently that you might want to catch up on. Now, I've also been reminded by tonight's two guests that you probably know who they are. So, Helen, Garner, Robyn, and Annear, introductions are kind of superfluous. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass you straight to them. So, Robyn and Helen, thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart.
Hey, Helen.
Hi, how Robyn?
Great to be sharing a screen with you. I'd much rather be with you in person, but
yeah,
these are the times we're in.
Yeah.
Now, we have called this a Weltschmerz conversation tonight, at your suggestion. It's an idea that about the melancholy of our time and of ourselves in that time. So we're sharing the world's pain.
World pain. Is that what Weltschmerz means? It does.
It is literally. It means world pain, but it's also something that it suggests that we're sharing it. We're feeling it too. Yeah. So that's partly what the tone of tonight's is. But I hope there'll be some laughs along the way and something to take us out of that.
Yeah.
Now, everyone probably knows that this is Helen's latest book. Yellow Notebook came out late last year, I think, and your publicity tour, such as it has been, I guess, has been plunged into this sort of event largely, unlike what you'd have expected. So Yellow Notebook is the first volume of Helen's diaries, and at the moment, I believe you're at work winnowing the next volume, the next series of your diaries for volume 2, and that's partly, I suspect, going to inform our conversation tonight, because another thing you suggested was something you have on your wall. I can't see it there in the background. Something you have on your wall that you say always makes you want to laugh, and it's a remark you came across by Evelyn Waugh that says, "Conversation seriously pursued consists of narrative alternating with comment." And so we're going to just try that format as a basis for an online conversation, for an on-stage conversation without the stage, and take turns, at least to begin with. And I'm sure it will all just will flow into one another as it goes. But I thought we'd start with, as Evelyn suggests, some narrative, and I thought I'd throw it to you, Helen.
Okay.
Have you got something in that line?
Yes, plenty. But I wasn't. I've got actually a little page of notes here, because I'm getting awfully forgetful in my 70s. I find things go in and out of my mind in the most fleeting manner. And so, one thing that's on my mind, my mother, when she died, she was about 7 years older than I am now, and she was 5 years older, and she had Alzheimer's really badly and was a complete lost soul. And so naturally I dread forgetfulness. And but interestingly, going back, and I was going to talk about diary, just the whole matter of the diaries and the sorts of things that crop up when you go back and read diaries from years ago. One thing that's greatly surprised me is I was not surprised to find that things I remembered in my ordinary going around the world memory weren't quite the same as the ones that I had written down contemporaneously. And so that, any fool knows that memory is a kind of an active force. It's not like a file that you just pull out of your head and it's always the same every time you take it out.
It's still a surprise, though, when you see it in writing, isn't it? When you see that difference come at you.
Yes. But I was thinking about this today, and I remembered a passage out of one of my books, namely This House of Grief, which was about a murder trial, about the trial of Robert Farquharson, who drove his kids into a dam. And I sitting through a trial where you're listening to people give evidence about events that happened some years earlier or sometime earlier. It's very interesting how their memory is attacked in cross-examination. And I suddenly remembered, I hope this isn't just blowing my own trumpet, but I actually did manage to articulate this question in this book. And I thought if it's all right with you, I'd just read out this passage about memory. And then I'm going to tell a little story about a memory that sort of went on. Anyway, I'll tell you that in a minute.
Okay.
But there's this, a man was on a witness was on the witness stand, and he was giving evidence about a conversation that he'd had with the accused man outside a fish and chip shop quite some years before. And he was being savaged in cross-examination. Anyway, I was thinking about it. And so this is what I wrote. As it happens, I have kept a diary for most of my adult life. Like any journal keeper, I have a sharpened understanding of the way memory works. Once in a while, years or even decades after some painful or important personal event of which I have retained the most crisply detailed memories, I get an urge to read what I wrote on the day in question. I hunt out the exercise book and locate the exact date. There is rarely anything surprising in the content. The story is always sorely familiar. But I'm often taken aback to find that aspects of the experience that I had clearly remembered in the form of spoken dialogue turn out to have been no more than thoughts or silent insights I'd had in the heat of the moment and had recorded as such in the evening. As time has passed, as the occasion has drifted in and out of my mind, my memory has worked, without my conscious knowledge, to make explicit these waves of emotion and private mental activity. It has translated them into passages of direct speech and enclosed them in quotation marks. Yet, though they were at the time no more than thoughts or silent insights, and though they were never uttered by me or anyone else as speech, I notice upon rereading them that they still ring true to the tenor of the experience. I can even say, with the authority of hindsight, that they are the most convincing part of the account. So memory, in other words, is not always a distortion. Sometimes it's creative, and it can be creative in a strangely accurate way.
It can create its own truth.
I beg your pardon?
It can create its own truth.
Yes,
kind
exactly.
of deep truth.
And
Yeah.
of course, when you're sitting in a court, this is pretty problematic. I mean, it's something that it's been shown hundreds of times in studies that people swear black and blue that the murderer, the man with a gun, was wearing a red jumper, and then someone else who witnessed it said he was wearing a green jumper, and things like that, which can cause a witness's evidence to sort of collapse in
Full heart, yeah.
pieces. Yeah, I just find that fascinating. But and there's one thing that I expected to find in the diary and didn't. And I hunted high and low because it was an incident which, do you remember when we were talking about planning this? One of the things we wanted to talk about was moments at which one's life could have, the fork in the road moment. And I knew that this fork in the road moment had happened, and I thought, oh boy, I can't wait to get to this part of the diary. And when I got to it wasn't there. I mean, it was just a tiny fraction of it was there. And I have the crispest memory of what happened. I'll just briefly outline it. What happened was I was having an affair with this guy, and he'd left his wife, but he hadn't told his wife about me. And so we were living in the same town. But I was not persona non grata sort of at his place, and so I had to spend a lot of time in another house that of my friend, which was my official residence at the time. And and a friend of mine was coming to town, a very sick friend, and I wanted to put her up for 2 nights while she had some cancer tests. And both my boyfriend of the time and my friend with whom I was sharing, whose house I was sharing, declined to have this friend of mine to stay. They didn't like her, and they couldn't understand why I was friends with her, and they just basically didn't want to take her on. And I was terribly upset. I thought, what it made me realise was that although I was in my late 40s, I didn't actually have a home. And so on the morning when it became clear to me that my friend was not going to be welcome at either of these 2 establishments, I felt really bad, and I was walking to work, and I thought, I had a sort of bet with the universe. I thought, if I see a flat to let on my way to work, which is a half-hour walk through a sort of suburb where there were plenty of things to rent, I'm going to rent it. I'll take it and I'll live there instead of this humiliating half world that
Yeah,
I was living in. So I'm walking along, and lo and behold, I see this flat with a big sign out the front saying "To Let." I thought, this is a message from the universe. So I rock up and I have a look from the outside, and it wasn't pretty or anything, but it was very livable and shabby but nice. So I went to the estate agent and said, "Oh, I'm interested in that flat. Can you let me have the key?" So I went and had a look. And I thought, "Oh yeah, I could live here, and then I'd be free. I'd be a free woman again." So I said to him, "Okay, well, listen, I can't sort this out until tomorrow, so I'll come in tomorrow." And I went to work, and I worked all day feeling really happy and pleased. And when I went home, back to my boyfriend's place, I said, "Oh, guess what? I found this place to live." And he went berserk. And my friend whose house I was sharing was also berserk. They said, "What on earth are you talking about? You can't do that. That is completely insane." And so basically what they did was they pulled me into line as if I was a teenager.
Huh.
And I copped it. And this is something in my life that I think, if I that day had stuck to my guns and said, "Well, listen, my position is untenable. I'm a mature woman. I've got, I make my living, and I can't float like this in between, sort of dependent on other people's charity." But I still don't know, and this is why I was disappointed not to find it in the diary, why or how I got my resolution was demolished, as it were, by my two closest people at the time.
So it's loomed large in your memory, and yet the evidence, if you like,
it's a very clear moment at which I abandoned my, well, I was going to say selfhood, but that might be putting it a bit strongly. But I wimped
agency.
out. That's what I'm saying. I wimped out.
Yeah.
And I still don't know why I wimped out. And I also wonder very deeply why I didn't write it down.
Yeah, that's what I wonder too.
Because I write down everything pretty much. There are other things that I remember that I didn't write down. But
do you think there's any chance? That it lives more vividly as a memory because you didn't write it down? Because it's something that needs to be preserved and remembered and kept standing out in your memory, and it's not written down. You never got that chance to record it at the time, and so somehow that preservation has happened live, if you like.
Well, that's an interesting thought, because I've heard people say, if you want to forget something, write it.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a striking thought to me. The fact that you can, put it this way, there are different ways of remembering things.
Yeah,
and writing them down is not the only reliable way.
Yeah, it has some sort of resonance with that idea that, if you have a burning idea for a book or for a project, and they say, for God's sake, don't share it with anyone, because the air comes out of it. It can go flat. This is. Have
you noticed that? Is that in your experience?
I don't know. I'm always very cagey, so I probably haven't given it a chance to see whether that's so for me or not. But that seems to be a received wisdom, and there seems to be something about that if you let it out in some other way, it disperses, and if you don't, you hold it
goes out. Oh, yeah, I'm sure that's true. I actually have had that experience occasionally, and I but quite early on, I think.
Yeah.
I learnt that you don't blurt things out.
Yeah, and with that memory of yours, the fact that you held it in,
well, it's a memory
that longer burning, sort of.
Yeah, it's a memory that it kind of humiliates me to myself to remember it. I think, what was the matter with me? I was such a wimp. Why was I a wimp on that day? And
did you build on that relationship, that affair that you were having?
Yeah, I did. Yep. And it all ended in disaster, but quite some years later.
So
But
that's another reason to think back on that, I guess, and to think, if I'd done that then, would that relationship have gone? If I can see why, I can see why.
If I had it was the moment at which I could have stood up and said, no, I don't like the terms. The terms on which this relationship's being consulted are humiliating to me. I don't like them. But I just didn't. That's something I've been reading about lately. I read a book called, I've got it right here. It's called, just happens to be on my desk, Parallel Lives by Phyllis Rose. And it came out quite some years ago, and it's a study of 5 Victorian era marriages of famous people. It's a terrific book, and I remembered, I read it way back when it came out, I think in the early 80s. But recently I read a review of it. It's just been reissued, and it's got a fantastic introduction about love and power. And basically she's saying, and the interesting thing is this, I used to own that book, and one time I cleared my shelves, and I took quite a bit of stuff to the secondhand shop in our neighbourhood, secondhand bookshop. And when and that was one of the books that I got rid of. And when I read this review of it, of its current sort of edition, I thought, oh, that's fantastic. I'm sure I had that. And I went through my shelves, it wasn't there. So I thought, I must have taken it to Wayward Books. So I go to Wayward Books. And she goes, yeah, I've still got it. So I could put it back off her. And when I opened the book, I found that the passage in question that I'd read about in the review, I had underlined in the book, and I had copied it into the back of the book. And it was so relevant to 1,000 situations I'd been in.
That is so strange that that book revisited you and your former self with the underlining and the writing out
the name in the front and the date and everything. It was really
is that the book that has one of the chapters about George Meredith and his wife?
No,
Peacock? No, it's not that one. I read a review of that reissue later.
Carlyle, Dickens, John Stuart Mill, and George Eliot. Of course. Yeah, it's a marvellous book. But what she's saying, what I'm getting at in all this, is she talks about how when people are talking about, people don't want to talk about power in marriage. They don't want to talk about it, especially the people in question. And when the subject comes up, it's always steered so they're actually talking about love. It's as if a talk of love is the screen that you put up to shield you from actually examining the power dynamic in the relationship you're in.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's really worth reading. There's a new edition out of the book. And
I think I saw that review.
Anyone who's interested in this matter, it should be everyone.
Helen, that so reminds me of something that I had as a narrative. It leads into it beautifully. That something during this lockdown, during this COVID period, when I've not been, so I live in Castlemaine, I haven't been travelling to Melbourne, which I do regularly, and I haven't been having new experiences and new encounters. I've been, swimming in the same fishbowl very much, which is fine. I'm lucky compared to certainly you in Melbourne at the moment. But what I found is I've had this sneak preview, but feels like it, of old age, where I've been living in my memory a lot more, or I've been drawing on it more. So in the absence of novel experiences, except I suppose for the virus itself, which we're told is novel, in the absence of novel experiences, I've been drawing almost involuntarily back on my memory, and things have been coming back to me that had been forgotten, that had been sunken memories, and they've floated back to the surface. And one thing it's not exactly forgotten, but one thing that's come back very vividly to me during this time is the time when I was, I guess, 19, and I guess most women of my generation have an experience of this, the season of my life that followed the realisation that I did not have to repeat my mother's life, that I didn't have to live as she had lived. And you mentioned the power discussion in marriage, which cannot happen, and that's couched in terms of love instead. So my mum, I guess, lived in servitude pretty much. I mean, she's still alive, but my dad's been dead for 15 years, so she's been free. But in that marriage, she was pretty much in servitude for 50 years. And rather than any time a discussion of it came up, and even still now, Mum will always say, but I loved him, or he loved me, it was like, and so that just kind of plasters over, stuccos over,
Oh, yes,
over
my case.
every,
That's exactly.
yeah,
It's like you say that and all bets are off. I mean, it's
yeah,
not worth talking about anything else because the whole idea of love and the phenomenon of love and the archetype of love is so enormous.
yeah.
It's enormous.
That's
And
right. So it's bigger than anything. It's at least in this telling of it, it's bigger than anything, and anything is forgiven if love is the end of the equation. If you put love at the end of the
yes, and it excuses you for
equation.
all sorts of weakness and pathetic wimpiness, like
That's
my
right.
not taking the flat that day. I
Exactly.
mean, I'm sure I must have rationalised it to myself by going, yes, but I love him and we love each other and we're just in love. And oh, okay, yeah, well, I'll wear this very crushed role that I've been given in this relationship.
Yeah. No,
Sweet.
that's such an interesting one. And I was aware at that time when I was 19, and probably before it, that again, talking about power and relationships, I was very aware that there was that my mum was acting, that she was the strong one in acting, if you like, that she was the strong one in the relationship, and Dad was actually the weak one. But she was constantly doing this this act that she, that in fact the reverse was true, because that was what was necessary to sustain the thing on the basis that they had this relationship. So so at 19, what a relief to discover that I didn't.
But how did you twig this? What made you twig it?
I think I'd had a boyfriend from when I was 16, and I guess I'd been acting out that relationship with him. We'd been at school together, and I used to get higher marks than him, and I deliberately dumped got worse marks so that he didn't feel. Yeah.
What do you mean you sneaked into the school at night and crossed them off the list?
No. When I realised that I was getting higher marks than him, I made sure that didn't continue to happen.
You made yourself stupider.
Yeah. So that again, I was playing that same game that Mum had played. So I was in a relationship that I thought was just going to play itself out as Mum's life had played itself out. And then I don't know, something happened. I guess I just realised that other relationships were possible. I cancelled that one. I got my driver's license, which I haven't used since I was 21, but it was proving to me that, because he'd always said, you can't drive. So I did some things like that. I had a couple of wild years and just showed myself that there were other possibilities out there, I guess. And as so many people do at that hinge in their lives as they enter adulthood, but it was just such a tremendous relief, that the scales fell from my eyes, and I thought, I don't have to do that, because I really believed that was the inevitability. And what freedom.
It's interesting, isn't it? I look back at I remember noticing when I was a girl, 42, so that's a long time ago. One day it occurred to me that my mother was on a short leash. That was the expression that I had for it. And by short leash I mean that she had no more free time than there were hours between meals. That she had to be there 3 times a day to make meals for all of us.
Yep.
And I was very shocked by this when I realised it. I felt I didn't make a resolution that I wasn't going to live like that. I just felt the sort of the word servitude, actually, that you used before, came to mind.
Yeah.
How did we get onto this? We wasn't supposed to be.
We were talking about love as an excuse for everything, really, was how we got to that.
Yeah. We could segue into the matter of forgiveness, which was something.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. This could go on all night. Sorry, did I butt in on you?
No, you didn't. We kind of we talked about this in our preparations, and you raised a question: is forgiveness possible?
And this comes
how is it done?
out of the whole concept of diaries and memories and wreckage of the past.
Yeah.
What made me think of it, just well, forgiveness. Yeah, it is forgiveness the same as making peace with someone? It's not quite the same, is it?
I don't think it is. No. Making peace, I think, is a lot more what we do most of the time. We find a way to live with the imperfections of the relationship that we've had and make it kind of work. So that's making peace. But whether it's an unspoken peace or whether it's something we actually arrive at together. But no, I don't think it's the same as forgiveness, is it? Do you think?
No, I don't think it's the same. I mean, I think that they can be linked, but they're not completely. They're not the same. I mean, you can forgive someone. I wonder if even forgiving someone is easier than forgiving yourself.
That's a question.
Of course, it depends on how much responsibility you're prepared to take for whatever the disaster was that happened. I'm because this is something that looking at this second volume of my diary, which I've just finished putting, sort of winnowing, as you gracefully called it. I just noticed how often in it I'm trying to. I need forgiveness myself. I feel that I need it. And, I have several times in my life gone through quite religious phases. And by that, I mean that I went to church a lot and thought about it and liked going to church and felt that it was important to me. But I often was wanting to be forgiven just for what a beast I'd been to someone, or how badly I behaved in a way that I found hard to bear. And the idea of I was quite surprised at how often this surfaced in the diary over those years of wanting to be having a sense of, I suppose, in Christian terms you call it sin. I mean, I don't feel sin in that sense of, devil like sin, I'm going to hell or anything like that, but just the crimes that one drags behind one.
Yeah.
And there are times in life where this load becomes almost intolerable. And there's in the prayer book, I'm an Anglican, in the Anglican prayer book, there's all these, I suppose in the Psalms too, the imagery of wanting to have chains struck off you.
Yes, yeah.
To have things struck off, it's used it's quite powerful language, the idea that you're hauling some enormous load and you want someone to cut the rope that's tying you to this
and free you.
To free you from your own sense of your own badness and your own cruelties or losses.
So the imagery you find the imagery there in religion, but does it give you a framework? Has it given you a framework for forgiving yourself? You have a sort of mechanism for it?
Well, because in religious terms, of course, you I don't want to use the word like a base, but you bow before some kind of force which you think has the power to take. I have no idea. And I don't believe in an afterlife or except, in a poetical sort of way.
Yeah.
But just that there's some force in the world which is, I suppose, the good. Some people would call it the good. Something before which you would like to, you'd like to take your hat off to it.
Yeah. I know it plays a big role. I know in AA, the idea of a larger power, of a greater power than yourself, and that they're working through the amends that need to be made as part of the 12 steps in AA. I know that greater power as a sort of guiding framework and as something to, as you say, to bow to is really important. I mean, you know, that has worked for lots of people as a kind of as a mechanism that seems to work. It's not something I've had any dealing.
No, this is good because now we're getting into the Weltschmerz part of this.
Exactly.
You wind up here eventually.
Yeah. But yeah,
So
I've never been there. I just kind of live with it like crumbs in my bed. The things that I feel bad about, and I don't imagine they'll ever go away. They just feel like, you know, the scar tissue, the kind of topography of a life.
scar tissue, yeah, that's an image that is familiar to me.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes feel, I mean, I think women of our generation feel, I don't know how old you are. You're a bit younger than I am, I think.
I just turned 60 last month.
Oh, well, yeah, there's another bit of half a generation, I guess, between us. But, you know, in my generation where sort of all bets, you know, that was the whole sexual liberation stuff.
Yeah.
And I see it.
You're breaking up there a bit, Helen. So
Each other in many ways, thinking that we were free.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, or is it just the visual?
I can hear you now. You've come back into focus.
Yeah, I keep getting a little message saying it's unstable, but there ain't nothing I can do about it.
It's not you, Helen. It's not you. It's just your technology.
Okay.
Yeah, I was you know, being those that half generation younger than you, I was the beneficiary of the kind of sexual liberation struggle that was more of a struggle, I guess, for someone born in 1942 than for someone born in 1960. I came of age in that beautiful sweet spot in the late 1970s where so much of the heavy lifting had been done, the hard work and the guilt kind of sifted out of those experiences. So I feel. I think you're unstable again, Helen, but you'll be back with us in a moment.
I can't hear her.
Yeah, you're there. You've gone very still.
You're all broken up, and I can't hear what's saying at all now.
You can hear what we're saying?
That's better. Now I can hear. You just were making a lot of scratchy noises before.
Yeah. And you were very still, but I can see you on the move again now, so that's okay.
This is ridiculous.
This is what we're reduced to. We're both writers of very different sorts. I just wanted to, I mean, you made your start as at least as far as I'm aware of you as a writer, you made your start as a fiction writer. Before that, probably as a diarist.
Yeah.
But as a public writer, as a fiction writer, and now non-fiction. I only ever have written or had published fiction, non-fiction rather, history, and sort of what they call popular history, so not academic. And from the time my first book, Bear Brass, was published, when I was in my mid-30s, for the next 10 years or so, I felt that I could
Can't hear a word. Nothing's happening.
Nothing's happening? Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
Good. Let's work with it while we've got it. For 10 years or so, I felt like I could turn my hand to anything. And because I had this kind of slightly playful, speculative way with history, people used to say to me, have you ever thought about writing fiction? And I hadn't, but then I did. I thought, oh, maybe they're right. And so I put an idea to my publishers, to our publishers, Helen, and they said, sure, go for it. They gave me a contract, all that kind of stuff.
You're gone again.
Oh. Can you hear me now? You're still again.
Nothing doing here.
Okay. What about now?
The idea that you put to your publisher was the last I heard. You didn't say what the idea was.
It was a historical novel type idea with a slightly supernatural element. They liked it. They said, go for it. I had a contract and everything. Anyway, I wrote the thing, submitted it to them, and they said, no. In fact, they said, they said if we were to publish this as it is, it would not do you any favors or something of that sort. And I was
Yeah.
I was so mortified, and I said, I don't want anything more to do with it. Just I'm putting it in a drawer. I don't want to work on it. I don't want to do anything. I mean, they were prepared to work with me on it.
You're gone again.
Am I a baby, do you think, to have just given up like that? And or should we just accept what we're good at?
No, I didn't hear any of that. You said you were mortified, and
I was mortified. I put it away. I refused all offers to work on it more. You know, that they'd work on it more with me, and that we'd make something of it. Does that make me a baby that I just said?
Absolutely not. You know, I can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. It's always astonished me that people feel that thing about the novel, that you're not really a writer unless you've had a bash at that. and I find that a really bizarre belief, and it obviously caused quite a lot of unhappiness to certain writers whose strengths are completely different from that.
Or elsewhere. Yeah.
You see, for example, I am amazed at the way you're at ease in the past as a writer. That is a complete mystery to me, and I know that I could never go there. It's like a world that's my imagination just does not broach the past. Unless I'm reading, you know, a particular book about a matter, but I'm a bit vague about what happened in what century, and I've always been like this. You know, I've had terrible flop. I've been a terrible flop as a student of history and gave it up. But so I soon realised that wasn't my strength. And but I don't know why people. There's a sort of belief that some people have. There's a belief in a hierarchy of prose literature, and that on the top is the novel. And I think that's an appalling tyranny. I think when I realised that it was a tyranny, I had this amazing sense of liberation. I thought, yippee, I have written a couple of novels, but was in the sense that they're very close to they're very close to non-fiction. I mean, I've always worked to the border between fiction and non-fiction. And what I want to write about is usually got something to do with what I've experienced or what someone close to me has experienced, and that's what I need to write about. But I know these, you know, there are journalists who can, oh well, now that I've been working in 50 years in journalism, now I'm going to, and they produce some broken-backed, clumsy thing, and it's overwritten, and it's just sad to me because they're trying to force themselves into some mold that they're not, because they think that it's a greater, it's more important in some way, or that it's art, or I don't know what it is. But I feel really sad for people who get discouraged if they try to write a novel and find that it's not their thing.
Yeah.
Would you ever try it again? Would you try?
Would I try again? No. It's such hard work, Helen. I don't know how anyone does it.
I know. It's hard work.
You've gone still again. Oh, no, you're back. Can you hear me?
I'm not. You're and I'm hearing anything.
I'm not hearing you. You've
just moved. You've moved.
I've moved. Yep. And you're very still. Oh no, you're moving.
I can hear you. Keep talking.
We're having the same problems. What a drag. If only this were a real stage. No, you're exactly right. It is held up as a peak to strive towards, and I felt very discouraged and like I was a lesser writer because I hadn't been able to achieve that. But man, it was so hard. I don't know how. Just the job of getting people into their trousers, the characters into their pants and out the front door and down to the letterbox. It was so hard. It was, worse than wrangling a toddler to do that.
It's not really hard, but you feel that it's hard. You feel that it's got to be done in a certain way,
Yeah, I guess so.
and you don't know what that way is or how to. Yeah.
Whereas
I don't find it.
history is just natural to me. You know, it is the fishbowl I swim in. You know, it's what I do instead of traveling. You know, I
Yes.
just go into history. So
Yes.
I've never been a traveller, but I just retreat into, or not retreat. I take an adventure into history instead of traveling. So it just seems like a place to visit, and a really weird place. So I love the weirdness of it. Of course, you know, I mean, there's that sameness as well, but I love the weirdness of it. So I love visiting those weird places that history takes me to. I'm very at home there. Yeah.
But it's not a retreat because you go striding in there. I mean, you just lay about you with the broadsword, you know, and to me, that is unthinkable. I just couldn't, I have no idea how you do it.
But then the places where you go, Helen, those, you know, those close up to crimes and the passions of people that often end up in court, the passions and the missteps and the misunderstandings, and how close you get to them without flinching, apparently, as a writer. I don't know how you do that. I mean, what took you there? In your early diaries in this book, I see little hints of curiosity in you, which I can see are the stirrings of what we've seen in
Yeah, I was surprised to find them, and they went quite a long way back. I was surprised because I'd forgotten them.
Yep. So how did they come to the surface?
Like a lot of people, I didn't realise that you go into a court. You know, I didn't know anything about the law, and I've always been surprised to find that people say to me, you know, really highly educated, sophisticated people still say to me, "How did you get permission to go to that trial?" And I said, "Well, you don't have to. You just walk in. You know, it's a democracy.
Yeah.
You can walk into the courts and you can sit there all day, and no one can throw you out." But I didn't know that either. I thought whenever I was in a court, I'd think someone was about to come up behind me and tap me on the shoulder and say, "What are you doing in here? Get out!" And I would think up these excuses and pretend I was from the age or something like that. But yeah, it's just that once you realise that, I mean, we're citizens. The courts are run in our name.
Yeah.
Once you realise that you've got some, that it's connected to you in some way.
You've got a stake in it.
It's your fellow citizen who's done this crime.
That's right. That's the whole jury of peers thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how they're going to manage, because they can't have jury trials at the moment, can they? So they're going to start having trials by judge alone, which we're the only state where they don't have those in Australia.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you think, well, one of the many things at the moment, you think that's going to stick. You know, it's going to be one of those developments that will stick. Like, I hope not like these Zoom events. I hope that is not one of those things that sticks.
That'd be awful.
It would be awful. There's a whole lot of chat over here.
Would you rather be judged by a jury or a judge yourself?
Oh, that's a really tricky question, isn't it? I would have thought a jury, but what do you think? You've been inside these trials.
Well, I've never actually been on a jury. Have you?
No, never
I
have.
haven't either. But
you've seen
I think that what?
You've seen them in action, close up and over the long haul. What do you think?
Yeah, yes, I have. But I haven't seen them. I haven't got experience of deliberation. I mean, I do know that one of my sisters, for example, was on a jury at a certain point, and because my house is on the direct train line to go to where the Supreme Court is, she came and stayed with me for a couple of days while she was on this jury, and she was terribly sort of correct and wouldn't tell me what it was about or anything. You know how you're not supposed to tell anyone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I was trying to shake it out. She was completely faithful, and also they made her be the foreperson, so she was super faithful to her task. But she'd come home sometimes in tears, and she'd say, "We know they're not telling us everything. We know there's some stuff that they're not telling us."
Yeah.
And I was very interested to hear that, because when you're sitting in court, you know, as a journalist, you can see the points at which the judge sends the jury out. And says because he wants to discuss with counsel whether a certain piece of evidence should be admitted, that is, heard by the jury.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like me as an ordinary citizen, I'm sitting in the court and I know the piece of evidence, but the jury is not going to be told
Be privy to
that piece of evidence. And so that is a very strange thing. And you see them come back in and you can see they're puzzled and,
Yep.
and they know that something's being withheld from them.
Something's being kept from
And
them.
it's really tempting to shout out, you know, it was the guy in the red jumper. But it's, yeah, the rules of evidence are very, sometimes rather hard to understand. They go against your sense of how things should be done. But
should be. So in light of that, what do you think? Would you sooner be tried by jury or by a judge alone?
Well, I've probably got a lot to do with what I was accused of. I mean, there are some sorts of crimes that I think it would be very hard to get a jury that was able to. Oh, yeah, no, I was going to say about my sister. One thing she did tell me afterwards was she said that at the beginning it was only a 4-day trial, and it turned out to be some sort of blackmail story.
Oh.
But she said that at the beginning, when they went out deliberate, she said at the beginning there was one woman, a middle-class woman, who said, and the accused person I think was Middle Eastern, or, you know, he was some kind of not a white Australian. And this woman said, okay, let's do this quick and get out of here. You know, he's obviously guilty. Let's just get out. And my sister said she was very pleased that she didn't have to say a word. There were a couple of tradies on the jury, and they just turned to this woman and gave her such a dirty look that, you know, it wasn't even necessary to say, "Oh, pull yourself together." You know, that's not how it's done. But she was sort of being bourgeois about it, thinking, "Oh, fuck, you know, he's obviously done it, and he's just done wog, and, you know, we can get rid of this." But anyway, she said that these tradie guys, or I think there was also an older retired person on the jury, and she said eventually they turned into a team, and they really were quite sincerely and in earnestly deliberating. And she tried to describe this process to me, and I was quite moved by it, and I think she was too. That people go in there and they're individuals, but there's a sort of dynamic that takes over, and I'm sure that some juries are a complete disaster. And you know, you hold out someone who says, "Well, you know, I'm a Christian, I can't possibly talk about this, so I'm just going to sulk in the corner." You know, somebody who won't deliberate, won't argue. They just say, "I've made up my mind, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore." You know, I think
that's pretty impressive when you hear about a jury working as a jury is meant to work, to be something greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. I think it's marvelous, and it's, you know, there's where in our society since the terrible.
I lost you again, Helen. You'll be back in a moment, I'm sure.
Oh, I'll say all my best things. Can you hear me now?
I can. Say one of your best things. I want to hear it.
No, I just want to talk about how during the fires last summer, and also even for a lot of the time during the pandemic, the people show their best selves. There are circumstances in which their citizenly virtues emerge, and that's always wonderful to me, wonderfully moving and thrilling. You think, you know, we really aren't just a bunch of drifting souls. We do know how to work together.
Yeah.
And I mean, you'd be great if you had that sort of jury. If you didn't, then you can't choose in advance.
Yeah, there'd be luck. There would definitely be luck.
Are you frozen?
No, you're moving again.
No, are you frozen? You.
No. I'm looking over here. We've got some chat, and I noticed that Deborah Coulthard has given us a terrific, a brilliant definition, she says, of forgiveness in the Winter Vault. Something like forgiveness is not something bestowed from one to the other. It happens between the two. She says she'll have to find the quote, but she thinks it relied on grace, that grace came into it. So Deborah wanted to share
Yeah,
that.
that's an attractive. Well, I would. That's where forgiveness and making peace coincide. I think in that definition, isn't it? Where
Yes. Yep.
you'd
I
have
can
to
definitely.
talk to each other.
Yeah, and that idea of grace, it's kind of like settling for something perhaps that's less than that everything isn't fixed, but that there's a it's not forgiveness, but grace. I like the idea of that in the absence of forgiveness. We're getting closer to the end.
Oh, so we are. Yeah, this is great. I'm loving
it. You say that you've kind of finished getting ready for your next volume of your notebook. What colour is it going to be? Do we know yet? It's not going to be yellow.
The colour. No, it's going to be called One Day I'll Remember This, which is a line out of what I said somewhere in it. Yeah. Anyway, the editor put that up. There were some other ideas that I hated, but I like that one. Yeah, that's what it's called.
I have a cartoon on my fridge, Helen, of a dog saying, "One day I'll remember this and bark," instead of "I'll remember this and laugh." I quite like that. But right at the end of, I like the way you end Yellow Notebook on.
You're gone again.
Oh yeah, you're very still too. Are you there? Can you hear us?
I can't hear anything.
You can't hear anything?
No, and you're frozen.
Am I? You're back.
Yeah, go. Yeah, go.
So Yellow Notebook, it ends on a cliffhanger, which is quite an achievement with a diary. You end with the words, "Can I save myself?" That is fantastic. Now, no spoilers.
Myself, yeah.
No spoilers. We don't need to know what happened, but did you save? Oh yeah, we do. Did you save yourself?
That's an interesting question. No. But it wasn't like it wasn't like falling off a cliff.
It wasn't, literally cliffhanger. No.
It was a slow fall off a cliff. No, I'm not going to tell you anymore. Actually, what you say, it's easy to find there are plenty of points in diaries where which could be a cliffhanger. I think, especially the kind of diary where you're constantly, examining yourself and seeing if you're about to do something stupid. One thing I noticed in the diary, particularly in the Yellow Notebook, was how many times went straight off a cliff. I mean, I just watching yourself.
Yeah.
You go back and look at what you were doing, and you just think, oh yes, I'm so in love, and suddenly you're off the edge. Whereas in the second book, there are many points at which I could have said, no, I think, okay, I'm leaving. I think there are sort of doors in your own history which you could have opened and gone out. I mean, the door was there. Maybe somebody might have even said, "There's the door."
Yeah.
And you just didn't go out. You just kept walking.
Yep.
That's a really interesting thing to me about a diary, and I think it must be true about anybody's diary, because there aren't many lives that just smoothly go without those moments.
It interests me when I look back at diaries of mine, the number of times I come to the same realization, and I'll look at it. I'll look at something I wrote years earlier and go, I figured that out then. Why did I make the same mistake?
Yes, that has happened to me 100 times. It's so awful. Well, it's like people say you live and learn, but maybe you
don't. And you even write it down and you don't remember.
Well, maybe that's it. Before we were saying
the
easy way to forget something is to write it down.
Yeah. Okay. So there, no more diaries, I think.
No.
So let's ask you, in the midst of lockdown, what's making you happy? What do you love right now? What are you loving?
I'm loving the fact that my broad beans have finally started to turn into plants. I thought they were never going to, and I was so distressed about it, because I've always been. John Watson said to me once, "Any idiot can grow broad beans." And I thought, seeing I didn't know how to grow anything, I thought, I'll put in a crop of broad beans, and they did. And every year I had a wonderful crop. But last year they were eaten by possums. This year the possums have moved on into some other territory, but they wouldn't grow. But finally they've just popped up. So that's what's making me happy, gardening.
Beautiful. What do you do with your broad beans, Helen, when they turn into beans?
Bloody well eat them. I
Just
I put them in hot water. I snip the ends off,
Yeah.
and I drop them into boiling, boiling and steam them, and then I squeeze them out like toothpaste out of a tin.
Oh, nice. I love that.
How do you do it?
They make great falafel.
Really?
Make great falafel. Oh,
Or do you smash
beautiful.
them up? How do you do it?
Yeah, beautiful, bright green inside.
And what else do you put?
Oh, some lots of cumin and I don't know, all those sorts of things, and a bit of
Are
flour.
you a good cook?
You'd have to ask somebody else. I don't know.
Okay.
I like to cook, and I put a lot of effort
You're
into
stuck
it,
in
but-
a look of puzzlement as a response to that question.
Yeah, you too.
Maybe
we
our
are
time is over
almost-
because you're frozen again.
We're almost on time. I'm going to ask you a
Somebody
question.
should save us from this.
Can
Yeah.
you hear? Can you see me moving?
You think
I'm going to
we
ask
should
you a
go back?
question. I'm
Go
going to
on.
ask you a question that somebody has put in the chat.
Okay.
Helen, you share so much of yourself and you've faced strong criticism. How do you manage with that criticism? After you expose yourself and face criticism, how do you deal with it?
Well, I've just learned how to cop it, really. I used to get all sort of wounded and feel that I should defend myself, but now I just wait a while and, well, I'm always saying this in interviews, but it's very bracing to be hated. You learn a lot from that. You learn that you can get over it and you can keep going, and you find that you've got a bit more gut. So
Yeah.
it's probably quite bracing. Yeah, it is. I hope that answers the
Oh,
question.
it's hard medicine, though. Hard medicine. Well, Helen, I reckon we can say we've done our job. We've had our conversation. I think we've acquitted ourselves.
Thanks so much. This is the longest conversation, the only conversation we've ever had together.
It is. I think we've met in the street once or twice, but
It's been really fun.
enjoyed having
Thank you.
this conversation. I only wish we'd been together on a stage. It would have been.
You're gone again. You're gone again.
We'll wait until we move again, Helen.
Okay.
Before
Now, are we both
take
moving?
off.
Let's quickly say goodbye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Goodbye, Helen.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for your
Robyn.
company.
Yeah, yours too. Good night.
And thanks all to you in the audience for tuning in to Goldfields Libraries. Stuart, thank you too, Stuart. And we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.